Oregon Health and Science University presents a resource for health science educators. Profiles of health science professionals with disabilities. A physician with cerebral palsy. Thomas Strax, MD. Dr. Strax is currently a practicing physician and a specialist in physical medicine rehabilitation. He is a professor and chairman of the Department of Physical Medicine Rehabilitation at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, and medical director and vice president for rehabilitation at JFK Medical Center at the Johnson Rehabilitation Institute. Dr. Strax graduated from New York University School of Medicine in 1967. He experiences cerebral palsy, a mixed variety of both spastic and athetoid. Dr. Strax considers his greatest accomplishment to be the fact that he is a father and grandfather.
I entered college as a pre-med student. One of my first hurdles was in chemistry. My first day in the lab, I accidentally knocked over a 5-gallon bottle of 12 normal sulfuric acid. And the chairman of the chemistry department asked to see me and told me that they were willing to waive chemistry. And I told him that I needed to take chemistry because I was pre-med. And he agreed to allow me a few more weeks to see if I could actually accommodate to the course. And one of the friends of the family was the owner of a medical equipment company, and he built me a setup for the lab where nothing moved. So the reagent vials sat in a wooden casement and they would not fall over. And I could use both hands to pick up the dropper to drop whatever reagent I needed into a test tube. And the test tube sat in a rack that wouldn't move and the test tube wouldn't fall and break. My parents did buy me a complete setup for home so I could complete some of my experiments, and I did fine in chemistry. Many of my teachers agreed to allow me to take oral examinations, which I think were very beneficial later on, learning to speak clearly and think clearly on your feet. I think the other exciting experience was learning to deal with people who were not completely in agreement with your particular goals. There were a few that didn't feel that I had a right to be in the class or a right to compete equally. And learning how to deal with that situation was really important in growing up. When I applied to medical school, it was very interesting because there weren't a lot of people to be proposed in medical school. In fact, there were none at the time I applied. I learned later that there was one individual who had cerebral palsy that attended an American medical school, and that was in the 1920s. When I applied to medical school, my first encounter was with a medical school that rejected me almost as fast as my application got there. I finally was admitted to NYU. At the time of my triumph of getting an admission notice from the school I wanted to go to, I was also a little bit depressed because I was aware of a lot of the intrigue that happened behind the scenes over my mission. And I also felt quite good about my experience I had at the school. My father suggested to me that I might want to talk to one of his friends who was on the board of directors at the medical center. And I called this very wise man, and I explained to him my trepidation and my feeling that the family was being admitted to NYU, not me. Yeah, I'm really, really worried that I'm not who they want. And he again said, why does it matter? I said, what does that mean? And he said to me something that was very profound and which I've utilized many times since. He said, it doesn't matter because only you can get into the second year class. And that's true. And I went to NYU, and there's a diploma back there. Says I actually graduated. One of the most important accommodations that I found in my first year was the Kelly clamp. For those of you who are not familiar with the Kelly clamp, it looks like a cross between a scissors and pliers, and when you bite down on what you want to hold, it locks in place. So you can take a Kelly clamp and clamp onto a skin fold and hold it in the left hand grossly and be able to dissect without any problem. The other real enormous accommodation was the vacutainer. All you know is that the shield with the blood test tubes that have vacuums inside, and you puncture the shield needle and then it automatically draws the blood into the test tube. Well, that was invented between my second and third year in medical school. Now, when I was a second year student, we took a course with medical students. We tested out many of the kinds of equipment we have to use. We passed endotracheal tubes in our partners, we drew blood, we took blood pressure readings, we listened to hearts, we looked into eyes, etc. My classmates were very accommodating except for drawing blood. Nobody in my class let me draw blood from them. And the chief resident, who was in charge of the students taking this elective, and I were talking, and I mentioned to him that my major fear in my third year was being able to draw blood. And this courageous individual decided that I would draw blood from him. And he was not satisfied until I filled an entire syringe with his blood. And I did. I did it all. I drew lots of blood, aspirated lots of joints, injected lots of joints, delivered 14 babies. We made an accommodation there in that I was sitting instead of standing, and they draped my lap with a sterile sheet, so the worst thing that could happen was the baby could fall in my lap. Dr. Medorsky is a very famous physician in her own right. I think she one year was a physician of the year in the state of California. But years ago, Julie had been on the same staff I was at Temple, and she was in charge of a third-year medical student course in physical diagnosis. And one day, Julie and I were talking, and I said to Julie, why don't you present me as a patient? You know, in a gown on a gurney, you know, my history, a physical exam, and let's see what they think would be my rehab potential. So we did. And I can assure you that the third year class at Temple University School of Medicine was sure that I was capable of making a living by selling pencils on Broad Street. And they wheeled me out for that discussion, and then I came back, walking back in, dressed as all you were dressing in a white coat. The point I'm trying to make in describing this is that these students had bias, and they saw me on the gurney and then had to deal with me as an associate professor and as assistant medical director, which is a very interesting leap. In 5 to 10 years, I can do brain surgery. It's all going to be robotics. It's all a matter of having a damping device on whatever knobs I'm turning to manipulate the lasers or whatever that will allow me to do anything. So technology is essentially creating new opportunities for people who are intelligent and caring and have the desire to be able to do, and make them equal with people who had the dexterity. Is going to be equalized for more and more people who may want to do something which today we consider to be ridiculous. It is my feeling that all students must be able to meet certain basic things. They must be able to understand the information that's given to them, synthesize it, come up with an idea, be empathetic, be able to communicate with their patient, and fully examine their patients. They must be able to do certain kinds of procedures. With everything I just mentioned, there are numerous ways for people to be able to accomplish this, not the regular ways. There are visual phonocardiograms, so you don't have to be able to listen. There are all kinds of aids to help people visually. There are all kinds of equipment aids to help people actually dexterously to accomplish these. You can't be handicapped and good at what you do. I'm professor and chairman of a major department. I'm going to be president of the medical organization for my specialty. None of these things, I think, have been achieved because I was handicapped in any way. To do the job I do, you must be intuitive, you must be caring, you must be able to think of unique ways of doing things, and you have to get very involved in the lives of people you want to help along. And you have to also be able to look at them as independent individuals with their strengths and weaknesses, and be able to transcend the idea that we'll do it the way I did. I consider that to be very important, along with the Goethe quote, we see what we're looking for, we look for what we know, and what we don't know we never see. I think that if you're going to be talented or good at what you do, you better be able to see the unseen. and to go into situations without preconceived notions and throw all your biases away.
Health Sciences Faculty Education Project, a resource for health science educators. Project staff, Project Director, Joanne Sowers, Ph.D. Project Coordinator, Martha R. Smith. Dissemination Coordinator, Lisa Ferris, M.E.D. Project Administrative Assistant, Tina Campbell. Additional support provided by Clark Hochstetler, M.A. Narrator, Z. Boone. For project information, please contact Martha R. Smith, Center on Self-Determination, Oregon Health and Science University, 3608 Southeast Powell Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97202. Telephone 503-232-9154, extension 131. Email smitmart@ohsu.edu. These videotapes were partially supported by grant PR/3P333A900-51 from the Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Copyright 2002 by Joanne Sowers and Martha R. Smith. All rights reserved. No part of this material may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior consent of the copyright owners. Oregon Health and Science University presents a resource for health science educators. Profiles of health science professionals with disabilities. Physicians with visual impairments. David Hartman, M.D. Dr. Hartman, a psychiatrist, was the first blind student to graduate from an accredited medical school, Temple University, in 1976. He has worked as professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania and currently works in private practice in Virginia. Dr. Hartman lost his sight at the age of 8. He wrote about his experiences and belief that medical schools need to, quote, think outside the box, end quote, when considering blind students in his book, White Coat, White Cane, The Extraordinary Odyssey of a Blind Physician. Tim Cordes. Mr. Cordes graduated from the University of Notre Dame and entered medical school at the University of Wisconsin in 1999 and was admitted to the MD PhD program. He is planning to earn his doctorate in biomolecular chemistry. Mr. Cordes, a guide dog user and blind since birth, has no usable vision. Stanley Wineapple, MD. Dr. Wineapple, a physiatrist, graduated from Boston University Medical School. He is currently the clinical director of the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at Montefiore Medical Center in New York and has been in practice for more than 25 years. Additionally, Dr. Wineapple is professor of clinical rehabilitation at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and a certified acupuncturist. He is widely published in the field of rehabilitation medicine and is a national expert on vision rehabilitation. Since the age of 8, Dr. Wineapple has experienced choroideremia, a condition similar to retinitis pigmentosus, a progressive hereditary disorder that produces tunnel vision, night blindness, and gradual loss of central vision. Dr. Wineapple's current vision allows him to see only partially the largest letter on an eye chart. Stanley Yarnell, M.D. Dr. Yarnell is a practicing physiatrist at St. Mary's Hospital in San Francisco, where he has worked since 1981. Additionally, Dr. Yarnell is a professor of rehabilitation medicine at Stanford University, where he has twice received the Jose Montero Excellence in Teaching Award. Dr. Yarnell has experienced recurrent optic neuritis since the age of 20. He lost all vision in his left eye 17 years ago and lost central vision in his right eye in 1987.
I went through 4 years of medical school. The first 2 years, basic science. I was able to use the various techniques I used in in undergraduate, using the raised line drawing to develop a mental picture of what everybody else was seeing through the microscope. I worked with a team of 3 other students in doing dissections on the cadaver. And here, you always have a situation where one student wants to be the surgeon, they want to do the dissection on the cadaver. The other students may just want to read the book and look at what's been dissected. And my situation was the students that read the book helped teach me. The person that dissected was able to separate out the different tissues so I could feel. The only snag I ran into with anatomy was that the formaldehyde made my fingers numb. So it was always a little race between whether I was going to learn the material that day or my fingers would go numb. I had one professor that was extremely creative. He would develop models of embryonic development. Well, of course, embryonic development is a changing process. So he would have different balloons, and then he'd blow up the balloons, and you could feel how the balloon moves in one direction but pushes other pieces away. And he'd have actually several balloons, and he'd have people blow up the different balloons, and you could see how different organs would expand, pushing other organs to the side and other ones to the front, etc. And he would often try these models out on me, and he figured if I could understand what he was trying to convey, then the rest of the students would have an easier time understanding what he was communicating to them. So in many ways, having to teach to people of different disabilities and limitations forces a professor to be an overall better communicator than if they just were lecturing to a group of able-bodied students. With a little humor, comment on that, a little humor, that the one class that I got honors in was surgery. And what actually happened was that they realized that the effort taken to dress me up in a sterile gown and walk me into the operating room took a little more time, and they therefore didn't have me spend 8 hours in the operating room every day like a lot of students. And I might spend a few hours twice a week in the operating room. And in this case, I was able to spend more time reading and learning how to take care of the patient before and after surgery, which is frankly what they want you to learn in medical school.
The reaction here has been really supportive. It seems that they're taking the attitude, it can be done, we will figure out how, where other places would have a knee-jerk reaction that it cannot be done. So I've gotten a lot of support from the faculty, and the time from the faculty and assistance from other students and support that way. One of the major accommodations I've used is a computer with a speech synthesizer. The students here at Wisconsin receive all their materials in bound books that they can flip through during class, and the university provides me with the same information on a floppy disk, which I just plug into my computer, plug in a set of headphones and read at my own pace. So I have access to all that material. I also scan many of the textbooks that we need and find a lot of them more and more these days in electronic format, which is great. And that's how I get access to most of the printed word. For figures and diagrams, the university has worked out a way to make raised line diagrams where a dark line that a person would see is represented by a raised bump on a page. So I can run my hands over, say, a figure of the relationship between pressure and volume in the lung and get that sense that someone else would get visually. Anatomy was quite simple. Well, not simple. It's a pretty deep subject, but it was so hands-on. I cut on the cadavers. I felt what was cut, and because I could stick my hands actually in the cadaver and get a sense of the spatial relationships, it worked out really well for me. So it was a lot of work, but just the raw physical nature of it made it quite doable. For lab work in the past, I've used adaptations like marking stems on a syringe so you can tell how far out you've pulled the syringe, so you know how much liquid is in there. Other automated fluid transfer systems where you dial up what type of amount of fluid you want to transfer. I've used an Opticon device, which gives me a pin readout on my finger to read scales and that kind of thing. Yeah, the Opticon has a small camera about the size of a postage stamp, and you run it over a surface such as a page or the display on a scanner, and underneath your finger and your other hand is a set of vibrating pins which represent what the camera sees in black and white, and so you can feel the numbers on the scale, for example. It's similar to a raised line, except it's constantly vibrating. It's not just raised, and it's only a small portion of the visual field.
I have a lot of strategies that I use to help me function as well as I can. One of them is, of course, there are many forms of vision substitution that can be used in a medical practice. Taking a history doesn't require vision. Examining a patient only requires vision in terms of observation. You can feel things, you can palpate things, you can listen to things, and that is not affected. I try to utilize an environment that's optimally lit. I use the assistance of others for a few bits of reading. So, for example, summarizing a patient chart, what the patient was doing the last time they came, it might be read to me by my secretary. If I need to review the results of an MRI scan or something like that, either the secretary will read it to me, or I could put it on the scanner that I have with my computer equipment, and I could read it through that way. It would be read to me. If I need to write a memo, I use a computer, and I have screen reading software that basically provides synthetic speech voice that reads the screen for me. If I want to write things down, I might use a pen that has a very bold typeface on it and paper that has very thick lines. If I need to sign my name to something, I use something called a typoscope, which is basically a signature guide. It just has a little aperture. I put it over the area that I have to sign, and I can sign. I also use taped books. That's both for pleasure and sometimes for general reading through the Library of Congress or through recordings for the blind. I will utilize the assistance of a resident or another attending physician if there are certain observation type aspects of the physical examination that are difficult for me to do. I rarely have to do that, and I have limited some aspect of my practice in order to not have to do that. So, for example, I don't do joint injections. I do acupuncture because with acupuncture you're not injecting anything that might go into a vein and produce damage. With acupuncture, it's very easy to feel for an acupuncture point, put the needle in. So other aspects of my practice, if I feel that a patient has something that really requires good visual observation, I'll refer them to someone else. It doesn't happen very often. The patients have essentially never had a problem with it. They're probably intrigued at the fact that there's a doctor who's visually impaired. Sometimes I think they're impressed because they think that perhaps I'm a role model in terms of what I do. But mostly I think they're just curious, and they just simply accept the fact that I'm a doctor who happens to have a vision impairment, rather than I'm being a visually impaired person who happens to be a doctor. Similarly, if I ask someone to observe something like a rash that I can't see, I will just tell them, describe it. Once they've described it, they're not going to tell me that looks like scarlet fever. They're going to just tell me, I see a maculopapular rash that's located in a particular area. What I then do is I correlate it. The major function I think that a physician has is a brain function, and that is taking medical information, taking data, synthesizing it, correlating it, and coming up with a diagnosis and a plan. None of that requires vision.
I still inject people's joints or aspirate them because it's primarily feel. What I can't do is draw up the medication. So actually my secretary is a medical assistant. She can do that. And the injection itself is really, it's tactile. The EMGs are both auditory and visual. And with the residents, if they have some experience, I can talk them through anything and make the diagnosis, because it's, it's a cognitive process. But with my patients who can speak, I always ask them when I walk into the room, I say, speak, so I know where they're at. And I tell them, At the very beginning when I meet them, I will make some noise, even if they're aphasic and can't speak. I'll say, make some noise for me because I want to be sure I'm talking to your head and not down here talking to your feet because I think that's where you are. And they get it. They understand that. They're very accommodating, or they will reach out and take my hand. Anyway, there's a good rapport because of that. I think it, in some ways, it has enhanced my ability to heal that is quite apart from any of the science of medicine.
But today, as a general psychiatrist, when I admit a patient to the hospital, I do my own physicals. There's always a question from time to time, how do I do an eye exam, and do I do a complete eye exam? Well, frankly, I don't do a complete eye exam. I often have the nurse help me notice whether or not the eyes are moving in all directions, or they notice any abnormalities. I ask the patient, are you having any trouble with your sight? Those types of questions. Now, if there's any question at all, any problems with the eyes, I'll consult an ophthalmologist. The reality is that I probably do just as good eye exam and ear exam as any psychiatrist that I work with. I mean, psychiatrists do not spend their time looking at eyes and ears. And if there's a problem with either the eyes or the ears, that we need to bring in a specialist.
I've been here for so long, I know where everything is. And at this point, I see very little. I can't see to read at all. No matter how hard I try or how big something is, I simply can't see it. The other things I use when I don't have the residents around, I use one of these templates, you know, to write with on the charts. It's just half of one, actually, but it keeps me online, and I am told by... I always had good script, and my arm still, even though I can't see it, my hand still knows how to write. So the nurses tell me that my writing is actually just as legible as some fully sighted doctors. So I'm okay. I think probably the bit of high tech that I have that does me the most day-to-day good is the Kurzweil reader. You know, it reads anything that's in print. It's an optical scanner, scans across, and then it starts to read it as long as it's not handwritten, but in print. As I said, I'm a low-tech kind of guy. I dictate, I have a transcriptionist that I have to pay, but that takes care of dictating, and what can't be read by the reader, my secretary reads out loud to me, or the nurses on the floor or the residents read to me out loud. I purchased dots from the local, you know, I can put on the phone so I can center my fingers on the keypad so I know where I'm at there. That's the sort of thing they're little things sometimes I forget, or my watch talks, you know. I do have some nice little low-tech things, but that's about it. I rely on people a lot, I think.
In the past, I would have my notes printed out in Braille. When the Braille printers came along, unfortunately the Braille almost overwhelmed the charts because it takes up a lot of room. Even before that, I'd have to make a set of notes for myself and dictate notes for the chart, which really was very time consuming. Okay. I come in the morning and review my schedule. And I have a Braille display in front of me, which is a line, 80 cells, or it's whole line, one line of page. And on this is a Braille display. It's shown by a lot of little pins that come up, and I can feel them. And then that display, or that set of pins, change as the computer moves. As I move up and down the page, I go from one line to another. Those pins change, so I feel a whole different line of text. Now, during a typical day, I'll look at my schedule, see who's scheduled, and I'll look for the patient's name, All right, now I have a patient that's coming in at a certain time, and I'm going to look up his last notes, and I can do that through the computer. The only difference between the way you would read it is you're seeing it on a digital display. I'm seeing it expressed in a Braille form. It's the same information coded in the computer, but I just have it expressed in Braille. Now, I can also have it expressed in a voice format.
1 period continues all of 200 mg daily period. 2 period will be for SR 150 mg 1 in the morning period.
The issue of accepting blind people or disabled people in the medical school is often somewhat frightening to medical schools. I know a lot of medical schools say, well, they just don't know how they'd accommodate all the blind people coming in to their programs. And frankly, I think we have to say up front that not everybody wants to be a doctor, and not every blind person wants to be a doctor either. That there's actually a minority, very small minority of people that really want to become doctors, and that's true in the blind community as well.
I'm living with a chronic condition, and in the hospital we see patients who are living with a variety of chronic disorders. Mm-hmm. So in a way, maybe it helps me empathize with them. Mm-hmm. And I think even having the presence of my seeing eye dog can help me build a rapport. It's an instant conversation piece, mm-hmm. and a way to make that human connection in a sometimes far too technical medical environment.
I understand what it is to have to struggle with stigma. I understand that if I make a decision to open up my cane and walk around with it, people are going to have strange notions. They're going to think that I'm totally blind. They're going to think I'm helpless. They may think I'm hard of hearing. They may think I'm mentally retarded. They may pat me on the back. They may sort of spit over their shoulder for all I know. Basically, there for the grace of God go I. But the willingness and consideration of what I do with a stigma symbol like a cane has a bearing on what I can tell patients. If I have a patient who doesn't want to use a cane because they have a limp, I can tell them, well, if I didn't use this cane, I might look better by not having a cane, but I'd look a lot worse by the fact that I'd be walking at about 1/10 the speed I normally walk at. I'm a very fast walker with this. So I can tell patients because I've been where they've been in certain ways. I can also tell them about ways that they can cope. Sometimes, of course, it can be very specific. If I have a patient who comes to me and they happen to have a vision problem, aren't they lucky? Because I know all the techniques, and I can tell them about them, and it's often really kind of opens up the world to them.
We all have strengths and weaknesses. For a lot of people, it's their personalities. Some of us have more obvious disabilities, and I mean that seriously. There are doctors who really don't like people. They went into it for a variety of reasons, and there's no reason that they can't get into a particular aspect of medicine, even though they don't like dealing with patients. They can go into pathology, or they can go into some aspect of medicine that has minimal patient contact, or even use their medical degree and further their education and go into some basic science research. And no one would ever question that in terms of selecting medical students. And it really is you can argue it's the same thing. I mean, for a medical student who has a visual impairment, for example, I mean, it's a weakness, but that student may have other gifts and strengths that will allow him, once he's trained to become that undifferentiated doctor, to further go into, a field like physical medicine, or go into psychiatry, or whatever it would happen to be that could accommodate him. Or people who have physical disabilities might not want to go in one path that requires a tremendous amount of standing, like surgery, but or that requires great dexterity when they have decreased dexterity, but there are so many other avenues that they can go into, and again, their strengths as disabled people, whatever it happens to be, may be exactly the reason why they become such effective healers.
Unless you know what is possible through technology, what is possible through just sheer hard work, what's possible through ingenuity, you're in no position to make a judgment. You can make a judgment on the person's intelligence, you'd hope. As you know, I mean, a person who has a speech impediment, let's say from cerebral palsy, may not instantaneously sound real smart until you listen for about 10 seconds and you realize they're really smart. You don't listen to the voice, you listen to what they're saying. You don't look at the cane, you think about what the brain is doing. You don't think about the wheelchair, you think about the person who uses the wheelchair. And that's what I think doesn't happen in the medical community. Physicians, I think, are very prosaic in their lack of knowledge about disability. Because disability is a very threatening thing to most doctors because you can't cure it. You know, you can't take it out like an appendix. So they haven't thought about it. I mean, most ophthalmologists don't think as much about what to do with a person who is blind because they can't do an operation for it. The person who's blind has to go into the vision rehab system, and then they learn how to live. But a lot of people in medicine don't think about how a person is going to live. So I think it requires an open mind and willingness to consider, number one, that physicians are not perfect human beings with superhuman physical abilities. They're not superhuman. They're human. Part of the reason I think that the medical profession is in trouble now is because doctors have sort of tried to think that they were not above the law, of course, but above the normal human limitations. And they're not above the human limitations. They are highly educated, honorable people who are still human beings trying to do what they do best. And I don't see any reason why, given the appropriate accommodation, a person with a disability can't do that, not only adequately, but very well.
Health Sciences Faculty Education Project, a resource for health science educators. Project staff, Project Director, Joanne Sowers, Ph.D. Project Coordinator, Martha R. Smith. Dissemination Coordinator, Lisa Ferris, M.E.D. Project Administrative Assistant, Tina Campbell. Additional support provided by Clark Hochstetler, M.A. Narrator, Z. Boone. For project information, please contact Martha R. Smith, Center on Self-Determination, Oregon Health and Science University, 3608 Southeast Powell Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97202. Telephone 503-232-9154, extension 131. Email smitmart@ohsu.edu. These videotapes were partially supported by grant PR/3P333A900-51 from the Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Copyright 2002 by Joanne Sowers and Martha R. Smith. All rights reserved. No part of this material may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior consent of the copyright owners. Oregon Health and Science University presents a resource for health science educators. Profiles of health science professionals with disabilities. Physicians who are deaf. Kate Salvatore, M.D. Dr. Salvatore completed her psychiatry residency in July 2002 at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. She has accepted a position at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Salvatore graduated from the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York in 1997. She experiences a profound hearing loss in both ears and uses speech reading as her primary mode of communication. Sharon Myers, D.O. Dr. Myers is a doctor of internal medicine. She graduated in 1992 from the University of Osteopathic Medicine and Health Sciences, now called Des Moines University Osteopathic Medical Center in Iowa. Dr. Myers is currently a physician at the Peace Health Clinic in Eugene, Oregon. Dr. Myers began losing her hearing at the age of 19, at which time she began speech reading and English Sign Language classes. Her hearing has continued to deteriorate. Carolyn Stern, M.D. Dr. Stern is a family physician at the Folsom Center in Rochester, New York. She graduated from Northwestern University Medical School in Chicago, Illinois in 1990. Dr. Stern was born deaf in her right ear and with a profound hearing loss in her left ear. She learned to speak as a child, learned sign language at age 16, and was fitted with a cochlear implant while in residency. Dr. Stern is multilingual and has been featured in Parade magazine.
I applied at 5 schools. I had interviews at 2, and Iowa was one of that I interviewed at. The interview was an absolute nightmare. I mentioned that I was hearing impaired, but I didn't say the degree to which on the application. I think that there was something on there in retrospect where I had to disclose it, but I didn't say how much, and I certainly didn't ever let on that I needed assistance, and in part because I didn't know I needed it. The nightmare was bad, though, because people played with me. They covered their mouths with their hands, and they would say things like, "Can you understand me?" And then they would do this and say, "I said, can you understand me?" And so it was humiliating, it was embarrassing. I had professors who didn't want to use the FM unit. They were concerned that maybe I was going to cheat or that somehow other students might perceive it that they were giving me answers that they didn't have access to. I have no idea, but there were a lot of professors who didn't want to use the FM unit. A few professors kind of balked at the idea of having an interpreter. I think that I had to go through this period where the professors had to see, is she going to make it or not? And I did. So after that, I think people were a little bit better with me. One of the biggest hurdles I had to cross, I think, was anatomy, because we had timed tests, and I couldn't hear the beeper. It was very simple. I just couldn't hear the beeper. And so there would be a student behind me, a student in front of me, so I'd be looking at the specimen, worried about the student in front of me, trying to figure out if they were going to move, and at the same time trying to figure out what this object was, and then at the same time being conscious that there was somebody else behind me in case they pushed me. That way I would know that it was time for me to move. And I couldn't do that. It was just awful. So I went to my voc rehab counselor, and she suggested that I contact the dean and that I ask about being able to take the test by myself. And I did that, and they were okay with me doing that, so that helped. But if she hadn't have had the ideas, I wouldn't have known what to do, because there were no predecessors. There was nobody that I could go to and say, "I'm hearing impaired and you're hearing impaired and you went through medical school, can you give me any pointers?" I always went to class because I figured I could get more information that way, but I only had an interpreter maybe once or twice a week if I was lucky, and that was usually for pathology when they showed slides. Most of the time I relied on the notes, and I just studied an awful lot. I would be mortified to have had an interpreter go with me on rotations, because medical school is you never let them see you sweat. And for me to think that there was something about me that might make somebody else have an advantage over me, I couldn't do that. I couldn't let them know that I had a deficit in any way. So that was where I was at. Now that I'm older, I don't feel that way, but back then I did. And that was part of my coming up process as a deaf person. My surgical rotation as a medical student was probably my worst experience as a medical student. I didn't tell the surgeons that I was deaf. I was just scared to do that. And so, you know, everybody would show up with masks on their faces, and I had no idea what was going on. And so what I would try and do beforehand was I would find out what the schedule was like the next day and read up on the surgeries, but I was only a student. There was no way I could know everything. And at one point I remember I was retracting, and the surgeon must have told me to move, and I was kind of used to them moving my hands how they wanted, because they did that with all students, and he didn't do that, and he must have just said stop or do something, and I didn't. I just stood there and took the scalpel and he cut me. And then I started crying, and he apologized, and then I told him that I couldn't hear him, I couldn't understand. And again, it was one of those things where probably if I had said something in the beginning, it wouldn't have been so bad, but I was so afraid that surgery is very competitive. And my fear was that, again, they wouldn't let me do the rotation, or they would just automatically fail me. But when I was an intern, we had to rotate through all the we had to rotate through everything again. And so I was rotating through surgery, and they all knew by then I was deaf. And I had a surgeon who actually would write down what he was telling me, which to this day I am just eternally grateful to him for taking the time to educate me.
When I started out in medical school in 1997, I had an infrared listening system that was installed in the first year classroom and the second year classroom. The professor would wear a microphone that worked with the system. And the microphone was amplified for myself as well as for the other students in the classroom. The third and fourth year of medical school, I used an FM listening system made by Phonogear. And this system was portable. I was able to walk around the inpatient units with it, go to classrooms with it, and go on inpatient rounds with it. And specifically the way it was used was the FM microphone would be clipped on the professor's shirt, and it would amplify their voice. Often I requested that we would meet in a small room off to the side of the inpatient floor so that I could better hear what was going on. The surgery rotation that I had in medical school was unlike no other. It required a lot of creativity. The problem for me going into the surgery rotation was that it would be very difficult for me to lip read in that environment. So the masks that are often used in operating rooms or all the time are not see-through masks, so lip reading is difficult. So in order for me to follow what people were saying, I first got an oral interpreter to wear the mask, and it was a special kind of mask. It was a mask that was originally used as a splash shield. And what it looks like is that it's a clear mask on top and with an orange bottom. So what we would do is flip the mask so that the oral interpreter wore the clear part on the bottom, and we ripped off the top part. Initially it seemed like a great idea, and it worked for about 5 minutes, but then it would start fogging up and the masking tape kept falling off. So, and you know, I really had to think on my own part, like, what do I do about this? Because no one had ever done this before that I knew of. So I had to think this problem through, which is what you have to do with everything, is problem solve. So what I then decided to do was to give my FM microphone to my professor, the surgeon doing the surgery, and have him clip the microphone inside his mask, and that seemed to work the best.
When I started applying for medical schools, I think the most important thing that I did was I put down the fact that I was deaf and that I wanted to work and make use of the fact that I was deaf as an advantage. It was an advantage in medical school. Another thing that I did, which was critical, was to go to the teacher after class or made an appointment to discuss every week what I didn't follow, what I didn't understand, how to explain it better. I took a lot of initiative on my part for that. I didn't want to miss anything. When I was in third and fourth year, that was also different because that was more clinical work. And some things I was able to do in advance. Like for surgery, I was able to look at the instruments with the nurse. She would explain what the instruments were. I also could look in pictures of how exactly the surgery was being done. A surgeon recommended, look in this book, look in this book. Cool, because I saw the actual surgery or video before the actual procedure. And everything really is very similar, right and left, very similar. And many of the surgeons were willing to have me assist. You know, they would say, okay, they would sort of come up with their own, okay, cut, okay, fine, stop, don't cut, you know. I use interpreters. They had to wear masks, so we had to be very creative in how that worked out. They had to learn what was clean, what was not the clean area, where they could stand, where I would stand, and so that was often worked out.
You know, when I was trying to figure out what specialty I wanted to go into, I definitely had to factor in my hearing loss, at least for me. I think everybody's personality is different, what we can tolerate, what our limitations are. And the two areas that I was interested in when I graduated from medical school were pediatrics and psychiatry. I decided, okay, you know, I'm going to give it a try because I really love psychiatry, and I'm going to try and find a way to make my hearing loss work in all this.
So I interviewed at several programs, and I never mentioned my hearing loss because I didn't have to. And then the first day, I was actually elected chief intern, and we all got our beepers, and we were walking around, and my beeper went off. And I thought, oh, what am I going to do? And so I just kind of looked at it like it was this demon or something. I thought, well, I'll just throw it out. But I didn't know what to do, and I just kind of stood there looking at it for the longest time. I just didn't, it never dawned on me that this was going to hit me in the face sometime. So I think I went up to somebody, like one of the nurses or secretarial staff or something, and I said, I'm Sharon Myers, I'm a new intern here. Could you please help me answer this page, without telling them that I couldn't hear on the phones? And they did, but I think they thought, oh, arrogant doctor who can't answer her own pages. Within a week, word was out that I was deaf and that I couldn't talk on the phone. Probably even less than that. So I would ask other interns to help me. I would ask other residents, and the pros were that they would help me. The cons were that, again, it's that medicine, competitive. So it would be, I got a page, they would talk, and they would take care of the problem, and they wouldn't tell me what the phone call was about. Or, sure, I'll put that line in. So that was another procedure I didn't get. And then I decided to go down to Missouri to do my residency, and so I applied for that, and it was denied straight off. And the letter that they sent me was that I was a danger, I was a threat to the well-being of patients. And at first I honestly thought they meant because I was going to be a resident. That's how clueless I must have been. And then at some point I realized it was about my hearing. So boom, that professor, boom, my internist mentor, all these people came together and wrote like literally hundreds of letters of support to Missouri. So then they decided that what they would do is they would interview me. And so I went down to Missouri, and my program director pulled me aside, and I was really angry by this time, and he said, well, Sharon, it's sort of like if you were an alcoholic. They really have to make sure that you're okay to do this. And I thought, okay, alcoholic, deaf, I don't see the connection there. So I went to the interview, and it was the same thing. They all talked with their hands covering their mouths, and they asked the most incredible questions. I was going to be a resident. I was going to be working in a hospital. One of the questions they asked was, how do you answer pages? And I said, well, I asked somebody to help me with the phone. Somebody listens for me, and then I can talk. So the answer that they gave back to me in the form of a question was, what would you do if you were in the hospital and there was nobody else there? And I thought, now, when are you ever going to be in the hospital all alone? But it was really bizarre questions like that that really made me more angry than anything else. And at one point they did say, it sounds like you're very angry about this decision. And I said, well, yes, I've gone through medical school, I've done an internship, I was chief intern. What more do you want? I mean, I'm just a regular resident. If you were to tell me that I'm that I'm a threat to patients' health because I'm a resident, I could handle that. But because I'm deaf, no. How is that going to affect my ability to care for people? And so they changed their minds, and they decided to give me a license. They not only gave me my temporary license as a resident, but 3 years later they gave me my permanent license, and I didn't have any problems.
On call and figuring out how to arrange for interpreter services was interesting. I still use the same coordinator of services that I used in medical school. And I found a group of about 4 or 5 or 6 different interpreters that would rotate. So on call, they would tell me when I was on call, And from like 12 midnight until 6 in the morning, we somehow hooked up 2 phones so that they could hear my voice. The interpreter would interpret. And we have a line, you know, the call rooms were like right across from each other. So we'd open up the doors, the interpreter would interpret, I would listen. You know, it's pretty decent. I was in scrubs. I was in scrubs. Sometimes if it was on the same floor or even just one floor up or below, I would just walk out to the floor and figure it out. The nurses were my biggest support. The secretaries were my biggest support. And we figured out how to page me so that I would know what to do. Code blue was another term, 911, and they would punch in the number of the room. So they knew how to get a hold of me. Or when the nurses would find me, I would always let nurses know how to get a hold of me. Interpreter was with me in case something happened.
And now I'm in a wonderful practice where people are a little bit more enlightened. I still have problems with people who don't want to communicate with me by the phone. I email probably 10 people a day just to communicate, find out what's going on. People who are right next door to me, sometimes I'll just email them because it's easier than talking with them. I email patients and they love it. They think it's the most wonderful thing, and I just make a copy of it and I put it in their file. People always say, well, you know, is email secure? I don't know, and I've discussed that with my patients and they're all fine with that. Communication is communication. I don't think it matters how it happens as long as it happens. And as a deaf person, I'm very sensitive to communication because I feel so isolated when I don't know. When I don't know that a patient of mine has been in the hospital, when I don't know that a patient of mine has died, when I don't know that somebody else saw my patient. So I'm more sensitive about it, I think, than others. The nice thing about this job is that accommodations are kind of built in for everybody. The email system, everything's on computers, so I've already got all that. I don't have to ask people to tell me things. I can get the labs, I can get the x-ray reports, I can do all that. When my patients come, they have a light system, so it's not a sound, it's a light, and so I can see when my patients are here. I use my TTY only when I have to. I have my amplified stethoscope, and then for dictation, they have mine set up so that instead of having to listen, I can't ever hear my dictations, but I never will. I just punch in a system, and then boom, I'm in the computer. So I just start talking away. And the transcriptionists all know that I'm deaf. I think I work harder than any hearing physician I've ever met because I have to. I spend more time with patients because I have to, because I don't ever get it the first time. And I have asked patients, I've said, I didn't understand a word of what you just said. Can you try again? I can palpate, I can feel bowel sounds just as well as you can hear them. And I actually had a surgeon teach me that. So that I do use skills that other people don't probably use because they don't have to. I've been resident of the year twice. I was resident of the year twice. I was chief intern, which was an elected position, and I'm now a fellow of the American College of Physicians, which is an honorary degree. So I think I'm doing okay.
Right now we have about, I want to say over 750, maybe more, deaf and hard of hearing in our practice. And the total numbers are about 2,500 total patients. We have not only fire alarm system, but also doorbell light system so that they're not surprised when I come in the room. Always happens, knock, don't hear anything, somebody comes in the room. Oh, somebody's coming in the room. The current stethoscope I have is a little bit more complicated and it hooks into my implant processor, or I wear it with the headset on my head and I have it attached to a box, which is an amplifier. I use pagers that can vibrate now, pagers that have at least alpha paging. So text comes off, or numbers either. And we're trying to figure out how to look into a two-way messaging system.
when I first meet a patient, I tell them that I have a hearing loss and that I have this device that helps me to hear them better. And then I ask them to wear it, they put it on. And with that instrument, I can follow conversation quite well. I think that by making it an issue, then it doesn't become an issue. So I think because I know that if I don't put it on, that I might miss things, that they might wonder why I'm not paying attention to something they said. And I think that being upfront, but also kind of brief about it, allows people to see that, okay, she's dealing with it now, and then that's enough, then we're going to focus on the issue at hand.
Patient safety, I don't recall that ever really coming up. However, something that we always think about. When I was in medical school residency, it was not as much an issue because you always had somebody supervising you, always. And if there was a situation where I did not feel comfortable, I had no problems calling an attending physician or the chief resident to say, what do you think? But I don't rely 100% on my hearing because most of it is through the patient history and physical and the actual visits that rely on heart and listening to heart tones. And if I feel I'm in doubt, I'll ask my partner to come or I'll send them for some tests. Based on their story, I can figure out what tests I need to do. We have nurses here, and I'm trained in PALS and CPR, and I'm going to be finishing up my certification for ACLS. So if a situation happens in the office, I'm prepared.
I've always been open with my hearing loss with patients. I don't think I've lost any patients because of that, and because I'm an internist, I tend to work with older people who have chronic illnesses, and I think that they see me as more human. So being deaf, being hard of hearing has been nothing but positive, I think, in terms of patients. I'm a very safe physician. And because I know my limitations. And I think that because that I know my limitations, I know when I need to ask for help. So I think that I'm probably more safe than other people. Do I miss things on exam? Sure. But so do other doctors. That it's as bright as day that they missed it. So I'm not perfect, but I'm human. And I think that because I know my limitations, I've learned how to somehow work around them. So yes, I think I'm very safe.
I think that people don't put me up on such a high pedestal. Sometimes they're not as fearful of me as a physician because I have my hearing loss. When I give my patients my microphone, there's a look of kind of, momentary surprise because they're like, oh, she has this thing I need to help her with. And I think that it makes people maybe feel less frightened about going to a doctor because their doctor is human too. And I think that patients a lot of times feel different when they go to a doctor because they have a problem. They're there for some kind of pathology. And I, have this thing which makes me different. And maybe that, the patient will feel less different if they see somebody that is also a little bit different.
The other thing is, I finally come to think that my services are worth it to the community because, yes, the community has to provide me with an interpreter if I go to a continuing medical education conference. Okay, but just think of the hours and hours of communication and educating and explaining to my deaf clients or patients. And just think of the hours and hours of interpreting time I've saved the community.
I think that physicians with disabilities have a place in medicine just as much as anybody else. I think that when patients can see me as more like them, it makes the relationship better. When other physicians see that somebody who is differently abled can do things that maybe they can't do, it makes us work better as a team, I think. And that's the key about disabled, is that it's not bad, it's just different. So everybody can bring something to the table.
Having a system in place was vital. It is paramount to getting through school with whatever disability you have. I think that often, there's this sense that students have to do everything just right in a traditional sort of way. And, medical schools have been around forever, and there's always these expectations of how doctors are supposed to perform. But I think that if you can find another way to do it, then that's fine. Because, if you have the skill in whatever form it may be, that coupled with compassion and sensitivity to the patient, which I think in some ways is just as important, then that will make a good doctor.
As far as advice given to medical schools or any other healthcare field, I think it's important to be flexible. I think it's important to think about the future. I think it's important to think about universal accessibility, not just for the one student with a disability, but what about future students with disabilities? Or what about future students, period? Come up with a videotape of your lecture, have it already captioned and ready so that in the future, if something pops up again, it's less expensive for you and more accommodating to everyone, a student within your school. Listen to what they need. Don't be afraid to ask for assistance or be afraid to talk to that person to figure out what they need and how it can be worked out. What can they offer you? What can you offer them? It's a two-way street.
So my advice for faculty in medical schools is, first of all, never assume. The brightest people in my class didn't become physicians. And the people like myself, perhaps, who struggled being accepted, being included, we're still here. And so I would say to the faculty, open your minds, learn about different people, and work with people on their level. First of all, as a teacher, that's your job, is to find out where the student is at so that you can reach them. But also encourage people to develop their potential.
Health Sciences Faculty Education Project, a resource for health science educators. Project staff, Project Director, Joanne Sowers, PhD. Project Coordinator, Martha R. Smith. Dissemination Coordinator, Lisa Ferris, M.E.D. Project Administrative Assistant, Tina Campbell. Additional support provided by Clark Hochstetler, M.A. Narrator, Z. Boone. For project information, please contact Martha R. Smith, Center on Self-Determination, Oregon Health and Science University, 3608 Southeast Powell Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97202. Telephone 503-232-9154, extension 131. Email smitmart@ohsu.edu. These videotapes were partially supported by grant PR/3P333A900-51 from the Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Copyright 2002 by Joanne Sowers and Martha R. Smith. All rights reserved. No part of this material may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior consent of the copyright owners. Oregon Health and Science University presents a resource for health science educators. Profiles of health science professionals with disabilities. Physicians with physical disabilities. Margot Kuchel, MD. Dr. Kuchel is a doctor of internal medicine. She graduated from Yale University Medical School in Hartford, Connecticut in 1995. She did her residency at the University of California, San Francisco, where she was also chief resident and a fellow. Dr. Kuchel is currently practicing and a faculty member at the University of California, San Francisco General Hospital. She was diagnosed at age 16 with ankylosing spondylitis, a rare form of arthritis. She has experienced frequent flare-ups which can affect her ability to walk and breathe. These flare-ups can also result in her joints freezing, which require her to use a motorized scooter. Doug Ota, MD. Dr. Ota is a physician in physical medicine and rehabilitation. He graduated from the University of Utah Medical School in 1995 and completed his residency and fellowship at Stanford University Medical Center. Dr. Ota is now the medical director of outpatient clinics, spinal cord injury services at the Palo Alto Veterans Administration healthcare system. During his third year of medical school, Dr. Ota had a diving accident and sustained a spinal cord injury at the C6 level. He is an incomplete quadriplegic and uses a manual wheelchair. Elizabeth Martin, MD. Dr. Martin is in her fourth year of psychiatry residency at Indiana University School of Medicine in Indianapolis. She graduated from Indiana University School of Medicine in 1999. Dr. Martin experiences muscular dystrophy, which has affected all her skeletal muscles. Since the age of 11, she has been unable to walk. She cannot lift more than 6 pounds and fatigues easily. However, her fine motor skills have remained intact. Dr. Martin uses a motorized wheelchair to get around.
In the med school that I wound up going to, I actually interviewed just about as sick as I'd ever been, basically unable to walk, feeling extremely ill, and within 2 or 3 days was actually hospitalized for quite a while. Missed all of my other medical school interviews, and when I got out of the hospital I got an acceptance letter from them, and I thought, well, if they were going to take me under the conditions, they knew what they were getting into. The first year it wasn't such a big deal. I was still able to walk relatively well, had some flares, but Yale has a famously flexible schedule, which was one of the things that was very appealing about it to me, other than the fact that they took me knowing how sick I was, which was tests were sort of anonymous and optional and could be rescheduled at any point, and that had certainly been a big problem for me in college, was feeling like I was somewhat unreliable, that I could miss things, and it was always kind of a big problem. And at Yale, if I felt sick, I sort of didn't take the test that day and just took it another day, and it was never a problem. By my second year, I spent most of the year with both of my legs, both of my lower sort of knees below in casts when they were trying to stabilize some problems I was having with my ankle. And things were becoming increasingly difficult, and I really was afraid that I wasn't, in fact, going to be able to make it through the clinical years.
Well, I'll tell you, the night that it happened, the neurosurgeon came in and said, "Doug, are you going to finish medical school?" And I kind of nodded my head yes, and he said, "Of course you are." So I think right from the very start, the standard was set that I had tremendous support, and that if I had any doubts in my mind whether I could do it or not, the rest of the hospital certainly felt I could do it. I think one of my biggest concerns was, could I do it, and what could I do? My original intention was to do orthopedic surgery and do a hand fellowship and be a hand surgeon, and obviously I wasn't going to be able to do that after my spinal cord injury, and so while I was laying there, my thought was, what can I do? And I think pathology or radiology or all these different fields that maybe I wouldn't have to have that fine hand dexterity. And the more I thought about it, the reason I went to medical school in the first place was all about functional recovery. Someone comes in with an injury or a problem, and I do something, and functionally I improved them, and they'd get back out there. And while I was on rehab, I realized that's what rehab's all about, functional recovery. And so it became an obvious choice for me. So the University of Utah was extremely supportive. The dean of the medical school sent a memo out throughout the whole hospital saying whatever accommodations are necessary, they would do that. One of the first adaptations they did for me was where I lived, I would have had to go up 2 flights of stairs, so obviously I wouldn't be able to return back there. They looked at their housing on campus and realized they didn't have adequate wheelchair accessible housing. There's 2 medical towers right next to the hospital, and they completely gutted one of the apartments and made it wheelchair accessible.
When I was first thinking of going to medical school, I came to Indiana University and told them that I wanted to apply, and the procedure that they went through to allow me to apply was to gather a committee together of some of their faculty. I met with 2 of those faculty. One was a neurologist and one was a physical rehab medicine doctor. They both had a discussion with me on how I would do going to medical school and what sorts of things would I need to be adapted for me. I mentioned at that time to the neurologist that I did have my own concerns and that I was afraid of people perceiving me as not being able to help others. And in certain situations, I realized that I really wouldn't be able to help others, like in a CPR type of situation. I wouldn't be able to perform an emergency tracheotomy on a patient. And when I mentioned that example to him, he said to me, you know, I've been out of residency for about 15 years, and I wouldn't be able to perform an emergency tracheotomy on a patient either. And so he said, that concern, I think, is a little bit too high of an expectation. We all have our own abilities in medicine, and we all need to focus on those.
I got to do my surgical rotation at a community hospital where was very laid back, and we were not on call every 3rd night, we were on call every 6th night. And I made it through about 4 weeks of my surgical rotation until I wound up back in the hospital, basically. My surgery resident had told me the first day that where she went to med school, you were either in the hospital or you were in the hospital. And so I actually called her from my hospital bed and said, guess what, I'm in the hospital, and thus I'm not at work. You know, when I was in the hospital, I hadn't finished my surgical rotation. It was pretty clear that I was not going to make it through the way things were going, that the medications I needed to be on in order to be able to walk well enough to do things were making me so sick as to not be able to show up. And so my dean called me in the hospital and basically said, you know, you've done enough of surgery, you're done. And I kind of protested and said, oh, you know, I still have 2 more weeks left. And he said, well, I'm the dean and you're done. He said, just promise me you won't be a surgeon. I said, well, of course I'm not going to be a surgeon. And he said, cool, you're done, that's it. You know, I'm dean. And so I was done with surgery, and I guess they gave me credit for being in the hospital. And I took a month off, and in that month decided the only way I was going to be able to go back would be to go back with a wheelchair. And the stress of trying to walk with such limb problems was just too much. And so I bought one of those motorized scooter that, and then returned to the wards a month later and did most of my 3rd and 4th year in my scooter.
I've certainly had to adapt my examination of a patient. That is, in medical school we do certainly learn an approach on running through the organ systems and our examination, approaching from the left side and doing it in a very sequential manner. I find that for me, because I have to move my wheelchair from one side of the bed to the other, that doesn't necessarily work for me. So I may examine I examine probably more in a quadrant type manner, where I'll do my reflexes and sensation and motor exam on one arm, and then do my reflexes motor and sensory exam on the leg, and then move to the other side of the body. Sometimes I'll position people in a chair and do part of my exam that way. So I had to do some problem solving.
The gross anatomy, of course, usually the cadaver is on a relatively high table, and you need to be able to see into the cavity. And so when I used my standing wheelchair, it allowed me to get up high enough to be able to view inside the body cavities. I also found that using mirrors, I would be able to see well with those two during gross anatomy. CPR was an issue when I started medical school, as medical students were expected to take an ACLS class and be certified in that. I spoke with the medicine department actually about this issue, and they stated that as long as I took the class, the ACLS class, and I was able to pass the test, I would not actually be expected to perform CPR, as long as I knew what you had to do to be able to perform CPR, what the actual requirements were, and be able to run a code verbally. And so that is what I did. And so when I would participate in a code, it would be more on an observation basis. The role of a physician in a CPR situation can often be that they're just the ones giving orders and knowing which medicines to give at what time. And so I observed many other residents and medical students doing the same thing. They would be more in a role of observation and giving verbal orders. When I started my OB rotation, I would attempt to do pelvic exams pretty much on my own. However, one day a resident was working with me, and he noticed that I was having difficulty reaching up to the cervix. And he himself actually came up with the idea to push against my elbow, and that allowed me to push my hand in far enough to reach the cervix, and I could feel the fingertip opening of the cervix at that time because she was about 8.5 months pregnant. The strategy of having others help me with doing an exam, basically not doing it for me, but just offering assistance, is one that I use often. I can either have a nurse or a resident or a medical student help me with deep palpation, where they'll place their hand over the top of my hand and help me push down when I need to over a belly. That works well in a bimanual exam, or sometimes even an abdominal exam where I need to palpate a liver, for instance. The first rotation I did was a general surgery rotation. I did not scrub in during that rotation, but I did get to observe several laparoscopic types of procedures where I could see the actual surgery going on a TV in the room. And I also participated during that time when I would work in the ER on call as a medical student. I would do some of the suturing that we are expected to know how to do, and did that many times on patients' hands, which are generally easy to access. So that those were the ones that I generally got to do. During my second rotation, though, I did get to participate. The people that encouraged me to participate were the nurses, actually. They devised a way for me to be able to scrub in. The rotation itself was a plastic surgery rotation for children. And the nurses devised a way that I could scrub in by offering me a little bit of extra assistance, but not too much. It was just a little. They decided that if I would go ahead and scrub my hands, get washed down with the soap, they would come out with sterile gloves and place a plastic piece over my joystick on my wheelchair. After that, I would drive back into the OR room using the plastic piece. I would maintain my sterility on my hands. They would gown me up, placing the gloves and then putting the sterile gown on me. They would wrap the gown around the sides and the back of the wheelchair so that the whole front of me was sterilized. And then I would be able to still drive my chair because the sterile gown was between me and the joystick. When I was talking with the director of the students, I mentioned to him, would it be okay if I went into the OR room because my wheels would not be sterile on the electric wheelchair because they go outside and back in. He mentioned to me that sometimes this could be a concern. However, he's noticed that a lot of his residents would dress in their scrubs, go into the OR, then leave the OR, go sleep overnight, walk outside to get lunch, walk back into the hospital, and then go back into the OR, often not changing scrubs in between that time. And so he felt like my wheelchair would not be any dirtier than the scrubs that they had walked around in.
You know, the way I did that was that I sort of made sure that everybody else who was carrying the code page, you're never really the only one who's carrying it. And it just so happens that in this program, there are always two people sort of carrying it who are capable of running it. You know, different sort of levels of skill are really capable. You know, it would be unfair to ask a brand new intern to say, you know, oh, I can't get there in time, so you get there and you run it, because they're not going to be able to. But sometimes it meant asking, sometimes when I was a third year, you know, it meant saying to a second year resident, you know what, I actually may be late, and you know, are you comfortable with starting to run it? And people were. You know, after I finished, one of the students who was going through the same thing told me that one of the anesthesiologists had said to her, why don't you get one of those keys? In fact, elevators, I had no idea going through all my training that there are keys that can override elevators, which makes a lot of sense, so that if they need to get someone up to the OR really quickly, there's a special key that will call the elevator down immediately. And so the anesthesiologist, who was someone who had a lot of experience with codes, turned to the student who was in a chair and said, you know, why don't you just get one of these keys? And I thought, oh, what a brilliant idea. I would have been the first one at all the codes if I had one of these keys. So there often are ways around it. I also was working in the ER when I started to have horrible trouble with my shoulder, and it was frozen. And I called a good friend one morning and said, you know, can you come over, because I actually can't get my pajamas off, and I can't brush my teeth. And so she came over, and I said, oh, and by the way, can you drive me into work, because I can't drive? And she said, I'm sorry, if you cannot get your shirt on, you cannot work. And I said, oh, you want to watch me? You know? And it was my right arm, which is my writing arm, and I worked in the ER. And had I been the only resident there that day, I couldn't have done it. You know, that in the ER, you actually have to be able to do procedures very quickly. That, you know, that you need to be able to put a line into someone because they're bleeding, and there's no way around that. But again, it just, and partially maybe I'm lucky that I never put myself in a situation where I was the only one who was going to be there. There was somebody else there, and what we did was we divided up the work. We had a fabulous few days. He said I was the brains and he was the brawn, and I would go around and see all the patients, decide what needed to be done, sort of talk to them. I speak Spanish, so I could speak to a lot more of the patients than he could. You know, talk to all the patients, decide on all the plans, and then would say to him, you know, this person needs this line, this person needs this procedure, and he would go around and just do all the work, and he thought it was great. He didn't have to think, and I thought it was great. I didn't have to do any procedures. I haven't had the experience of patients having a hard time with it. I think patients sense in you, they're almost got this, I had the feeling that they got the sense, oh, she knows, you know, she knows what it's like to suffer, she knows what it's like to be sick. Patients are in the hospital or at the doctor because they're sick, and so an amazing number of patients actually in some ways it doesn't even seem to register. I think a lot of patients are curious and would ask, and you know, I feel pretty strongly that when patients are there, it's about them and not about me, but I would sort of just answer, I have arthritis and I don't walk well, and this helps me walk, and that almost always kind of ended it.
When I am applying for a new position, I usually up front, you know, I don't want to show up with any surprises. And in fact, in my personal statement letter that I wrote for residencies, I talked about my disability and how it influences how I practice medicine, and really showed actually what are some of the positive impacts I have as a result of my disability that a physician who doesn't have a disability may not have in interacting with the patient. So they certainly knew from the very beginning what my disability was. How that interplays with the patients, again, I find it actually allows me certain advantages with the patients that other physicians don't have, because patients see me in a wheelchair, and in a way they're encouraged to see what can be done after a disability. They also know that some of the excuses they may give to another physician don't necessarily work with me because I've gone through the same situation. So I find that they oftentimes open up with me.
Really?
And I can use myself oftentimes as a direct example of what I think they can expect.
My concerns over my safety for doing a psychiatry residency started when I was a medical student, actually. When I was a medical student, the psychiatric nurses were concerned that I wouldn't be safe with some of the patients. Sometimes the patients can become very violent and need to be restrained and or given medicine for that. They felt like if I was on the wards, I might add to the patients being upset, or I might be injured myself if they were violent. I spoke with the director of several of the hospitals, and I spoke with my residency director and discussed different ways that I could avoid being in a dangerous situation. One of those options that came up was I carry an alarm with me, and that way I can alert the staff quickly if there was any difficulty with the patient and I was in their room or down the hallway with them. So I can use that alarm to protect myself in any type of dangerous situation. Other means of protecting myself are I never go into a room with a patient who's restrained or in seclusion without having at least one, if not two, staff members with me at all times. It is common practice that any patient that's secluded or restrained, you do not go and see that patient by yourself. You take one or two staff members with you.
Yes, I think they need to get exposure to all areas, and the reason that is to gain an understanding. Now, someone who, for example, has a visual impairment, and for histology, a large portion of that consists of looking through a microscope to be able to identify abnormal cells. How is that going to work for someone with a visual impairment? Well, I think the important thing for someone in that situation is they can describe, in this kind of medical condition, this is what you would see with the cells, and they'd be able to demonstrate the same understanding of the pathological process. Or someone could describe what's being seen in the microscope, and then they should be able to identify, well, what type of cell is that, or what is going on. So basically, they achieve the same goal. How does that impact them career-wise? You know, it's probably not going to impact them that they can't actually visually look through a microscope and identify a cell. I never do anymore. I've identified my certain field. They could probably do it better than I could at this point in their training. I'd look through a microscope, and I'd be very lucky to figure out what I'm looking at. So I think it's important for them to understand what it is they should know. And as they go through their medical training, they're going to identify what field they want to do, and they should be able to meet those requirements and be competent in that field. And it doesn't mean they have to know and be competent in, well, they should be competent, but they don't have to be able to do everything the way everyone else does in every other field. Because none of us do.
You know, when I got there, the dean called me in and basically said to me, you're here and you're going to be a doctor, and if it takes you 10 years, it takes you 10 years. I think part of it was, and you know, I didn't go to any other medical schools, and it's possible that every medical school would have been this flexible. I would hope that they would, but I also think it really had a lot to do with having a champion, you know, who really believed that that being a doctor was not about being able to run marathons, that wasn't actually what made you a doctor, and who also believed that you didn't have to, that not every doctor had to be able to be, as we say in medicine, pluripotent, that you didn't have to be able to turn into any kind of doctor, that it was pretty obvious that I wasn't going to be able to go into a surgical specialty, that I couldn't stand long enough, that I was beginning to have trouble with my hands, that to do any kind of specialty that would you know, really require fine manual dexterity wasn't going to be a reasonable choice. I really feel that we all bring different things to medicine. Everybody brings different things to medicine, and to lose, you know, we talk about, you know, my disability was that I couldn't walk far. My disability was that I didn't have fine movements of my hands. I actually think that there are plenty of people in medicine who have great movements of their hands, can run really far, and have the disability of not having empathy, or have the disability of not understanding what it means to be told you have an illness that's never going to go away. And in my mind, that's a disability. This is what we do. This is what we do. We work on human frailty. That's why we're doctors. That's what we care about. And to exclude people, I mean, I think it's sort of a false dichotomy to say that everyone else is undifferentiated, that anybody in medicine could go into everything, because there are certainly people in medicine who could not work with the kinds of patients I work with, who could not, it just wasn't in their nature, who could not, be a psychiatrist because they didn't feel as comfortable with communication skills. There are certainly people who couldn't, there are just a whole range of things that people can and can't do. And I think it's really, to me, very sort of arbitrary to say that because you can't do things that have to do with physical finesse, that you're the only one who can't do everything, that we need a whole variety of different people in medicine.
The medical school does have a philosophy that you should be able to complete certain expectations that each rotation has, whether it be surgery, medicine, obstetrics. However, when I would start each of these rotations, I would go to the director and discuss with them what things I could do and what things I couldn't do. And generally they were open with me on working to find ways that I was able to do almost all, if not all, of the things that would be expected of me. Also, hand in hand with this is that I saw a lot of medical students not complete all of the said objectives of the different fields of medicine because they would be interested in surgery or they would be interested in medicine and they wouldn't want to do all of the physical exams or procedures that were required for some of the other rotations. Therefore, they made allowances for those students as well. They didn't have to complete things that they didn't necessarily want to. And because I physically wasn't able to complete things, they wanted me to know how to complete them and be able to verbalize those things and be able to answer questions about those on an exam, but I did not actually have to do the physical aspects. Sometimes there is the myth that the physician has to be perfect and completely healthy in order to serve the public and to serve their patients particularly. However, I think that the focus of that question is that it is a myth. All physicians are not healthy. All physicians are not perfect. I have yet to meet a perfect physician. I think most physicians, if they're honest with themselves, have particular problems. Yes, I have a disability, and that makes me not able to walk, but I don't think it affects my ability to be a physician, and I don't think it affects my ability to be a good physician.
I think that the cost of not having people in medicine who've had the experience of being ill, have the experience of disability, I think we see those costs. I mean, I think we see it every time we talk about patients, in front of them in a sort of third-person way. I think we see it every time, the resident who told me that people in wheelchairs can't have sex. I mean, I think we see what the costs of not having people around with disabilities are. I think that those so far outweigh any theoretical risk of taking people in who couldn't do every single thing in medical training. Not only is it the right thing to do from sort of a social justice, perspective of, equal opportunity for all, it's simply the right thing to do for medicine. It's that, we would be doing a huge disservice to medicine if we continued to weed out people who didn't fit, this ideal of sort of being the Olympic athlete, that I think it's such a denial of what we are as doctors that to me it's really one of the most important things, and I hope in the ways that there have been pushes, important and fantastic pushes to have women participate in medicine, to people of color participate in medicine, to have gay and lesbian physicians participate in medicine. I think it's we really need to really start talking about having people with disabilities and people with physical illness and people with all sorts of mental illness and everything participate as well.
Health Sciences Faculty Education Project, a resource for health science educators. Project staff, Project Director, Joanne Sowers, PhD. Project Coordinator, Martha R. Smith. Dissemination Coordinator, Lisa Ferris, M.E.D. Project Administrative Assistant, Tina Campbell. Additional support provided by Clark Hochstetler, M.A. Narrator, Z. Boone. For project information, please contact Martha R. Smith, Center on Self-Determination, Oregon Health and Science University, 3608 Southeast Powell Boulevard, Portland, Oregon, 97202. Telephone 503-232-9154, extension 131. Email smitmart@ohsu.edu. These videotapes were partially supported by grant PR/3P333A900-51 from the Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Copyright 2002 by Joanne Sowers and Martha R. Smith. All rights reserved. No part of this material may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior consent of the copyright owners. Oregon Health and Science University presents a resource for health science educators. Profiles of health science professionals with disabilities. A physician with a hidden disability. Ferdinand Luis Rios, MD. Dr. Rios is a general surgeon who has been in private practice for over 23 years. He received his master's degree in science from Rutgers Medical School in New Jersey and graduated from the University of California Medical School, Irvine, in 1978. In 1984, Dr. Rios was the chief surgical resident at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara, California. Dr. Rios currently does locums for other surgeons in Oregon. Dr. Rios experiences a learning disability. He was aware of his disability at an early age, but was not formally identified until he was a practicing surgeon. Dr. Rios is the chairman of the Boxing and Wrestling Commission in Oregon.
My disability is a learning disability, as I understand it, personally and from experts that have evaluated me. I tend to think that perhaps it's some sort of dyslexia, although that term doesn't give me a very good definition. But my learning disability is trying to understand the written and the language context of people's syntax, how they speak and how they convey their message. And it wasn't that I really couldn't read. I could read, but I would not read for very long. I could read the words because I had memorized them. But I didn't understand what I had read. So people say, well, you can't read. And then, well, I can read that word and I can read that sentence. But when you put that whole group of words together and supposedly it means something, it didn't mean anything to me. If there was a stop sign and it said stop, I knew what that meant. It meant stop. But if you added a complete paragraph to before you approach the corner, first stop, wait 5 minutes, then proceed, then stop again, it was all this different roles and different things that were happening all of a sudden would confuse me. But in class, when the teacher would say, now why don't you read this paragraph, and I would just fear, I would sit in the back of the room when my turn would come to stand up, I just could not get through a paragraph without not knowing how to pronounce the word or what it meant, and then furthermore, not understanding the meaning of what I had read. And I severely was punished by the teacher in front of the class, and also was looked upon by my peers as someone who's not very smart. But I had a terrible time trying to do the mathematical equations for chemistry and biochemistry, and would constantly fail that course. And I think the third time around with biochemistry, I did have a professor who was very understanding, and I was very aggressive in those days. I would go visit them and talk to them and try to tell them that I had a problem, but it was not a learning disability. I would just tell them, you know, I'm not that smart. This is where I came from, and I've come this far. You know, help me. That was what I used to say. And sometimes they would take pity on you, or sometimes they wouldn't listen, you know. But this one particular professor said, well, I'll tell you what, I really want you to pass this course, and you study over the summer, and then you can take it at home. And when he said that to me, he was saying, do whatever it is you need to do to pass this examination. That was sort of an open communication, and it wasn't a way of cheating. It was just a way of finding a comfortable place, no distraction, and plenty of time. You could open a book, but a book wasn't going to help you pass that test. Most of those tests were never made for you to have a book and pass. You could never do it. I mean, that would make it worse if I were to pick up a book and try to find an answer, because I'd have a difficult time trying to find what I was looking for. So that was the first time I saw that someone was caring and understood. But no one would ever say you had a learning disability. They didn't seem to know. I took a great interest in medicine. I wanted to know what it was all about. And so I did all the menial jobs, and then I decided I had the type of courses to apply to medical school, and that I was going to do it. And I think everybody in my family, when they heard that, thought I was nuts. And I think so did my teachers. And so I think I chose 20. I saved some money and applied the first year and didn't get accepted at all. As a matter of fact, I saved every one of those letters. I still have them today just to remind me. And the second year was the same. And then the third year, I met a gentleman who was a president of a theological school in Berkeley, who had befriended me and believed in me. And he says that he would pay for 25 schools for me, that he would help me with that. And that did make a difference. You expose yourself more. And I did, and I got accepted as an alternative at Yale, an alternative at Minnesota, but then I got accepted at Rutgers, which is now the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Jersey. During my medical school years, there were times that I would forget that I had a problem because I was always trying to figure out a way how to accomplish a goal in a particular subject. And so I had developed ways of compensating that were unusual to others. And one, of course, is to read out loud, and that seemed to help. I could understand things. And also, instead of reading a whole chapter, I would read the summary of the chapter, and that would be less reading and more retention. But reading an entire chapter, I mean, some of those chapters would really great sleeping pills. They would just put you out. One thing that I always do, that I've done since I was a kid, is that when I have to read a chapter, people take notes. I don't take notes. If I find something interesting in the chapter that's important, that I know it's going to be asked on the test, I rewrite it, the whole paragraph, because it helps stimulate me, and I seem to learn it more because I'm taking it with my hand and putting it down. But that is a very cumbersome thing to do. So I would rewrite a lot of things because they would stick a little closer to me, to my brain. Well, reading patient charts was not a problem because they were short and they were all whispered. I read them out loud mostly. Difficulty reading other doctors' handwriting was, I mean, that was really difficult. But the good thing about patient charts is that you always have the patient. I remember being up at night and being called to the emergency room to see a patient who had been in the hospital multiple times for problems, and when you'd get his chart, it would be like a telephone book. And that would just scare me. And what would happen is that if you get called to see a patient in the emergency room, you would go there, and the first thing that I would do was see the patient. But normal interns, the first thing they do is get the chart. And I've always been that way. I never look at the chart first. I always see the patient first. Family practice at University of California, Davis was great. You got to rotate in every department, from psychiatry to internal medicine, surgery, orthopedics, neurology. And when I rotated through surgery, I liked it. And people at that surgery department liked me and let me do more. And so I found a skill that I didn't think I had. And it was great because once I did something, I found that afterwards, reading it, even though reading was difficult, became much more easier. So that's why I like surgery, because once I got in the operating room, I would be told what to do, and I did it with excitement. I did it with finesse. I did it better than they did it. I did it without any fear. I was in control. And that was a wonderful feeling. I had never had that feeling in my life. But there was always that cloud of the academics of being able to pass your examinations and your boards. And I knew that'd be a problem on the way down, but I wasn't going to worry about it until the time came. Early in the board career, in order for them to qualify you as being board certified, they'd have to go to the institute that you were practicing and witness your operations. But this became so big they couldn't do it. So they went the easy way. Take a multiple choice exam and make it hard. Give it a high failure rate. I feared that because I knew from other members in my class that had trouble passing the boards, that it was going to be tough for me. But I took it, and you're only allowed to take it 5 times. And I took it the 5 times, and I took it 4 times. And by the 4th time, I was in a situation where my wife said to me, "I think you have a learning disability." And I had spoken to another surgeon that I knew that I worked with who thoroughly enjoyed my work, and every time he got into problems he'd call me and I'd help him, and he'd say to me, "Lou," he says, "You know, the reason you can't pass the boards, Lou, is because you've got a learning disability. It's no big deal." I never heard that. But he accepted me, and he knew I was good at what I did. So having one more time left to take the boards, I decided to find out whether I did have a disability. So I went to see a neuropsychologist and got tested and CT scan, all of that stuff. And they said I had a language-based disability, cognitive disorder. But then I had proof that I had a learning disability. It was well documented. And I qualified for books on tapes. And I was ready for the boards, and I had taken the initial steps of writing to them, explaining my learning disability, and that my final and last attempt at taking the boards, would they allow me to have a reader and extra time. And they were flabbergasted. Absolutely flabbergasted. They thought I was a hoax. They said, "Well, we can't do that because you should have told us that before. And that was a very difficult question to answer because I didn't have any proof and I was just hiding. So they thought it was a gimmick. Well, after hassling with them for some time, they agreed. They said, we won't give you a reader, we'll give you extra time. So in reality, I was taking the boards my last time, but my first time with accommodation. And I went, and I was confident that I would pass this examination. And one of the things that was very helpful was that I was put in a room with the door open, and now I was allowed to whisper. And because before, on many occasions when I took the board, I would always try to sit away from everybody else and speak the question out, and I would get in trouble. The proctor would come by and tell me to shut up, or the person next to me would say, you know, can you please be quiet? So I took it, and I waited months, and they said I failed. And I asked to see the scores, because I wanted to make sure that I had the right ones were checked, because I was confident that I had passed it. And I had taken courses, spent money taking courses, how to pass your boards, guarantee you'll pass your boards. They said, well, send us $200 and we can show you the scores. And that was my last time, and I could not take it again unless I went back to school, to a residency for 1 year. All my patients have a story. And at times I will choose to write about them in my journal, which I do write, or draw a picture. Drawing pictures has been very gratifying for me. Whenever I give a patient what we call a informed consent before I do an operation, the paper on the table where they were lying down, which is sort of like tissue paper or quite a butcher paper, I will draw the operation. And many times I've ripped that off and crumbled it up and threw it in the garbage can, and the patient reaches in and takes it. They love to draw. And so in my charts you'll always see a drawing. Trying to interpret laboratory analysis, if there are numbers, there's no problem. Trying to interpret a pathological report can be a problem because the impression is not clear. And what I usually have done is I've gone to the pathologist myself and say, show me the slides and teach me. See, I'm not afraid now to tell people to teach me. Whereas in my younger days, you would be afraid to go somewhere and admit that you didn't know something. But it took me so long to figure that out, because I am confident now in something, whereas before I was not confident in anything. Reading articles are very difficult, and I stopped getting journals. I just listen to all my tapes on surgical reviews, and I get one every month. Then I get a CD-ROM, and I can listen, and I can, now at my age, I can pick and choose what's important, disregard the rest. There would not be any accommodations that I would need at a hospital, because you see patients, you do dictations, and you read your dictations, and they're yours. The only accommodation would be if the hospital requires you to take a test, like most hospitals require you to take a CPR test. And there have been many hospitals that I could have said to them, I need a little extra time just to take this 50 multiple choice question, because I know automatically I'm going to flunk it. Now that's amazing, just amazing. Here I am opening people's abdomens and chests, taking care of them in the ICU on ventilators, and I'm worried about this stupid little test that could cause pandemonium if you flunk it. Well, I could always ask for accommodations, but I don't, for just having that fear. And there have been a couple of times when I've taken the test and you're only allowed 5 wrong, and I've gotten 6 or 7. You know, so we'll take it again. You know, this is an opportunity for the other side of the fence, nurses and other people, to say, okay, we got you, doc, you know. It hurts. You know, this testing really hurts. I dream of a time in my life where I don't have to take any tests. I don't know when that'll be. Telling people that you have a learning disability is a very difficult thing. And it's not something that I do without hesitation. I'm very protective of myself. Even when I took medication to help me read something, I never told anyone I took medication. And I've always told my patients, or people that I knew that took medication to help them concentrate and focus, that they should never tell anyone that that's what they do, because they would be judged by that. And for the same reason, I don't announce that I have a learning disability, because there's not enough of us out there to be welcomed. And you pay dearly for it. But there are times when I do, when I think it's important to share it with another individual who has similar problems. You need to be compassionate. Kids that I've met and that have learning disabilities, and they know that I'm a doctor, I mean, I've just opened up a new world for them. You're a doctor, you mean I can be a doctor? Yeah, you can be a doctor, you can be anything you want. You just need to know how to do it. You need special help, because you're really smart. Patients, if patients sometimes will pursue, well, why aren't you board certified? And I will simply tell them that I can't pass the examination because I have a learning disability and the board won't accommodate me. And that's it. And patients will ask me, well, what is your learning disability? You know? And depending on the education of the patient, you can tell them you have dyslexia, or you have you know, problems with written word, but you have compensated and you do very well, and here's my record, and you could call this patient, that patient, you know. Make them feel as comfortable as you can. I always find people tell me, you know, I have that same problem, you know. Everybody must have a little bit of something in there. Now, professionally, you have to be very careful. Now, since I've moved around a lot because of my training, and especially now because I'm not boarded, and I apply for hospital privileges, the first question is, are you board certified? And, of course, when you're not, they want to know why. And you say, well, I took it 5 times and I flunked it. You should end it there. And they say, well, are you going to take it again? I say, well, no, I don't want to take it again because I don't want to spend another year doing a residency to go take this examination. And then they say, well, in order to get privileges at this hospital, you need to be board certified. And you think about that, you know, because as a learning disabled person that has some rights that have been denied, I have made an attempt to research what this means and what are my rights. And when I hear that, I know that a hospital cannot discriminate against me because I'm not board certified. Because most hospitals take federal money, Medicare patients. And the Medicare law specifically states that you cannot deny a physician privileges to a hospital if he is not a member of an organization, especially an organization that is not federally funded. But nobody has thought about that. Nobody even touches it. And they say, oh, that's not right. I say, yeah, that's right. You cannot deny me. I say, you're asking me why I'm not a member of a board that's private, and you're taking federal funds. So when you do that, they don't quit, because they feel that because you have a learning disability, there obviously must be something wrong with you. How in the world did you become a doctor? You must have cheated. You must be stupid. There must be something wrong with you. So, my friend, you need to show us how you know that you have a learning disability. How do you want me to show you that? Well, do you have any records? So then you have to produce this neuropsychological report. You have to produce your Stanford Binet test, your Whistler test. You have all these things that I have in folders. And then you have to go in front of a board of credentialing people, other doctors, and tell your story. Put yourself in an embarrassing situation where others can ask you questions that are very, very difficult, that is none of their business. But in doing that, you don't convince them, because we live in a world where we don't believe anybody. And so that's what I had to do. I had to find someone else and get retested. And they finally took months, 6 months, to give me privileges. Whereas other hospitals, I've asked, are you board certified? No. They have a policy that says, well, so you're not. As long as you did a residency, that's what counts. So if you have a learning disability, you need to be very careful who you disclose it to. Because it can hurt you. It can hurt you, and it can backfire on you. The public thinks that we're not capable of doing the things that other people do. But we are. We do it every day. I've proven that I can do it, and I think many can do it. But we need to keep fighting. I think that medical schools should give consideration to students that have learning disabilities and have not been able to achieve what is necessary to get into medical school, the grades or the sciences. Because they're missing out on talented people who are ahead of themselves. Learning disability probably is not a very good term, but it should be termed as though absolute creativity. Because these are individuals that can show you the other side of the mountain before you cross over. These are individuals that will bring a fresh light to helping you treat other people that consist of people with learning disabilities. Everybody needs to be represented somehow. They have to understand that a lot of learning disabilities can be overcome if the individual is given the special ways that we know how to achieve the goals that the others achieve through the normal standards. Whether it be by having a tape recorder, books on tape, giving extra time, or having a reader, finding out what method that individual learns best. Not ignoring it. You have to find out how he learns best. Not just how everybody else learns. If you do that, I think that we will get a better quality of physicians who care, who understands. In boxing, they harass each other before a fight, they call each other's names, and they fight. It's on one-on-one. They can feel their strength. They smell their sweat. Sometimes they exchange blood. That's why we test them for HIV. But when the fight is over, they hug each other. And they're no longer enemies. The only enemies I have are those people that don't understand about learning disabilities and don't want to change. They need to open their minds.
Health Sciences Faculty Education Project, a resource for health science educators. Project staff, Project Director, Joanne Sowers, PhD. Project Coordinator, Martha R. Smith. Dissemination Coordinator, Lisa Ferris, M.E.D. Project Administrative Assistant, Tina Campbell. Additional support provided by Clark Hochstetler, M.A. Narrator, Z. Boone. For project information, please contact Martha R. Smith, Center on Self-Determination, Oregon Health and Science University, 3608 Southeast Powell Boulevard, Portland, Oregon 97202. Telephone 503-232-9154, extension 131. Email smitmart@ohsu.edu. These videotapes were partially supported by grant PR/3P333A900-51 from the Department of Education, Office of Post-Secondary Education. Copyright 2002 by Joanne Sowers and Martha R. Smith. All rights reserved. No part of this material may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior consent of the copyright owners.